Making models with the Entity Framework is pretty easy. Our dog model is a very simple example of using Entity Framework. However, more often than not, you'll need something more complex just to interface with your persistent data storage. In most cases, you'll actually will create a very extensive Entity Framework design that you can interface with stored procedures and custom repositories and custom complex models and so forth. Entity Framework as a whole is just an object relational mapping tool. It maps or it creates classes that map to a database. It was originally released in .NET 3.5 SP1 and matured with .NET 4.0 and so forth. Today, Entity Framework is actually up to Entity Framework 5, which came along with the release of Visual Studio 2012, .NET 4.5, and so forth. Link to SQL appeared a little bit a while ago and has been since enveloped in .NET, and it is similar to Entity Framework. There are some key differences though. Some of the differences from Link to SQL is that it is specific to SQL Server. Also, there's a one-to-one object to table mapping. Is this an abandoned technology? Not really, but yes it is. Microsoft has gone ahead and said that there will be no more enhancements for Link to SQL, but they may be fixing some bugs. Microsoft obviously considers Entity Framework to be the technology of the future because they have listened to developers over time on what has made Entity Framework so powerful and accepting with developers doing Microsoft technology. So Entity Framework as an MVC model is very perfect. This is a great model or ORM to use with MVC just because it provides properties to interact with data, and it also provides methods for CRUD or create, read, update, and delete. So you can quickly whip up an MVC application tied to an existing database by using Entity Framework and create very simple create, read, update, and deletes so long as your tables are joined correctly and you have your constraints in place and so forth, and Entity Framework can actually read into that. So for instance, if you have a table of products and a product can have a category ID on it, when Entity Framework would generate that view page, it would list all the columns of the product, and where it had category ID, it actually would know to go to the category table, pull a list of the available categories, and it would actually envelop a drop down for you. So that's actually a pretty cool aspect of Entity Framework. In this exercise, we'll be creating an Entity Framework model that uses the product table from the AdventureWorks LT2008 R2 database from SQL Server. This is currently what the database looks like. This is a sample database that we can get off the internet, which is Microsoft's AdventureWorks LT database. Comes preloaded with several tables and some store procedures as well. And we are just being going to focus on the product table today for our little exercise. So in Visual Studio, go ahead and open up. Let's go to File, New, then select Project. And here out of the list that we're going to do, we're under the C# folder hierarchy. Go choose Web, then we're going to choose ASP.NET MVC4 Web Application. And then what we can do is give it a friendly name. I'll just go ahead and call ours AWLT Products, since that's what we're going to be focusing on right now. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Now the next screen you are presented with allows you several different templates to start out MVC4 product. You have empty, basic, internet application, intranet application, mobile, and then web API. Each offering a different version of MVC4. For this exercise, let's just leave it as internet application. We'll keep Razor View Engine selected, and we do not need a unit test project, so keep that unchecked, which will keep that grayed out. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And while it's creating the project of MVC4, basically what it's doing is it's adding all the dependencies, it's creating packages, package manager if you decide to use that further. It's also adding a lot of new JavaScript files that are now included in MVC4 projects, as well as things like any framework, Knockout, JS, and so forth. So here's our default view that you should normally see. It always dumps you to the home controller of MVC4. And over here on the right side, you can see that we have our listing of our MVC4 project. So the first thing we want to do to attach to an Entity Framework model is we need to actually tell it we want to do that. So over here, select your models folder, go ahead and right click on it, go down to add, then select new item, and in our viewer on the left side, select data. So then it'll filter out just the models that we want. At the very top is ADO.NET Entity Data Model. Go ahead and select that. And down where we get a chance to name it, let's rename it from Model 1 to AWLT Model.edmx. So this will play a good part into what we're going to be doing next. And it's very important to get this right the first time, just because that name is going to be used pretty much everywhere in any framework. So now that we have our name, go ahead and click Add. Next, we are given the option to generate our Entity Framework model from a database or an empty model. Now, we don't have an empty model, so we want to do it from a database because we do have a database. But if we didn't have anything to do yet, or if we did not have a database, you can actually start with an empty model and create a model version of what your database is to look like. And then what's really neat is that you can actually create the database off of that model. So really, really cool stuff. But today we're just going to select generate from a database, and then go ahead and click next. Now you are faced with making connections or using an existing connection. We don't have an existing connection in this case, so let's go ahead and say new connection. Opens up a new window. And you can do a list of server names, but if you already know what your server name is, go ahead and type that in. For us, we're going to go over to our epdev server and see what we are using here as our name, which we are just using local. So I'll go ahead and copy that. Go back to our Visual Studio. I'm going to paste that in. So there's our local. And what it automatically did is it used Windows authentication and attempted to make a connection. You will have noticed that select or enter a database name became available after it made that connection. So here's our list of our databases. Go ahead and select AdventureWorks. You can test the connection at this time, but the fact that it pulled up the database means that pretty much it's made the connection. So from here, go ahead and say OK. Now what we have is we have our connection that it made. It shows the connection string that any framework's going to use. It does look a little bit like a mess, but you can see some pieces in there, like there's our database server, there's the name of our database, what type of security it's using, and so forth. Now, very important down here where it says Save Entity Connection Settings in the Web Config As, we want to change this long name to something a little bit better, just because it's going to be all over the place. So we'll just change it to AWLT Entities, because we don't want to be typing in that long string if we don't have to. That just becomes ridiculous. Okay, so after you change the name, go ahead and hit Next. Now what it does is it's queried the database. It says, here's all your objects that you potentially can bring over into any framework. For right now, we just want to concentrate on the product table. So go ahead and click the arrow next to tables. Then click the arrow again next to sales LT. And then lastly, check the checkbox next to product. And again, just like previous versions, here's this long namespace that we don't want. So go ahead and take out the first part of it and change it to AWLT model. Again, because this namespace is going to be used all over any framework, we want to keep those short and concise and something that makes sense to us. Okay, so we have our product table checked. Leave all of these options checked, where pluralize, include foreign key, yada yada. Model namespace is named AWLT model, and we can go ahead and click finish at this point. So what it is doing right now, it's actually creating our Entity Framework diagram model, which should open up here momentarily. There it is. Looks like it's opening up correctly. And what this is that this is just a model of what exists in the database as any framework has digested its information. So it has come across, it says, oh, the product ID, I know what type of column that is. That's a N32 as far as the code goes. Here, let me pull this up. You can see this table mappings of, on the left side shows what's in the database and the type of SQL Server column it is, and on the right side shows what it's being translated to for any framework or .NET in general. So here we have product number, which is an varchar on the left side, but on the right side, product number just comes out as a string. Money comes out as a decimal. Actually, lots of things like floats and so forth come out as decimals. It's just a way to keep things standardized from here. So right now you could actually move on to pushing this out if you wanted to, but this has been the example of connecting ASP.NET MVC4 to a entity framework in a SQL Server database. In the book, we show how to display a list of products. So what we're going to do is walk through on how to do this. First thing, let's create some goals that we want to have for this exercise. We want to create a product controller class using the AdventureWorks sample database, and then we also want to add action methods that perform operations on this model. And this will not be a complete application, but it will be a great example of how to make any framework work to your benefit in MVC4. In this try it out, we're going to be displaying a list of products from the AdventureWorks database by using Entity Framework. Now we'll be creating a product controller with action methods that will perform various operations on the product model and display various views. One of the nice things here is that by using Entity Framework in MVC4, that is that the Visual Studio tooling will create most of the code for you to have a full-featured application that you can use to maintain the product table within the AdventureWorks database. So here we are in our Visual Studio 2012 application that we made in the previous try it out. We have pulled in our products table from the AdventureWorks database, left the mapping alone. First thing we need to do, if you haven't done it already, is go ahead and save the Entity Framework model, and then right click on your project and choose build. What this will do is this will compile our Entity Framework and make it available to be accessible by the controller when we go to add it. So it looks like it has succeeded here. So let's go ahead and click back in there. Over in your Solution Navigator, right click on the controllers folder, click Add, and then choose New Controller. Up top, what we want to do is change default one to say Product. Okay. And then notice below that we have MVC controller with read-write actions already pre-selected. So what we want to do here is go ahead and within the model class, let's go ahead and choose our product. Should be right here. Go ahead and choose that because that's the only class we want to deal with right now. And the data context class, what we want to select is our AWLT entities, which should be the first one out of the group. because that will bind with what we have in the background. For views, we're going to leave them as razor, and we don't have any advanced options at this time, so go ahead and click add. So what it's doing right now is it's creating read, write, update, and delete rules and views for our product class that we had just, or product controller, excuse me, that we had just created. So here's our product controller. It's also created an index. Actually, that's the previous index. It's create details, a create, and an edit view. And we can just click on any one of these. Here we are seeing the strongly typed names of it is pulling down from our model for a product. Here we have name, we have name again, product number, color, and so forth. A lot of these are labels, and a lot of these are also the matching fields that go along with it. So let's go ahead and build this project. So you can either go build AWT, or you can right click on the project, choose build as well there. So what we want to do, you can either hit F5 or Control F5 to open up a browser window for this particular example. So what we want to see is a list of our products coming from the database via any framework, and we should be able to see that. We should have an index view which builds a grid which you can edit any of the rows. So we built our product, but we don't have a direct link to it. So up in our address bar, we're just going to simply type in product after the domain name colon port that you're using. So just type in product, and here we go. So this is a list of products coming straight out of our SQL database. And notice that we didn't have to do any custom programming to get this to show up, outside of telling any framework that we wanted to use the product class to build our pages out of the box. So since we have so many columns, you have to scroll across, and you'll be able to see that it has created an edit and a details link and a delete link for every single row. So this first one, I can go ahead and click details and see what it shows. Now it's not a very intuitive way that it just dumps out all the information, but you can clean this up. You can rework the view to your heart's content with styling and so forth. The idea here is that any framework gets you a little bit closer. It's like the 80% rule. It gets you 80% there for details, and then you take it from there to deal with it. So from this detail screen, I'm also going to go ahead and click edit, make sure this works. So here we have all of our columns coming from the database. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, make sure that works, which it does. If we click new, it gives us all of our empty columns. I'm just going to click back to the list, and lastly, we're going to make sure our delete works. So we are going to delete this first item here, which is the HL row. So let's go ahead and hit delete. And here we have a prompt saying, are you sure you want to delete this? Again, I didn't build any of these. Any framework built all these views that is enabling us to manage this data. Let's go ahead and hit delete here. Okay, so it looks like it got rid of that first one. So what we will do now is we will go and just kind of scroll through our list, make sure everything looks good, which it does. And I think this wraps up this try it now of creating a list of the products and the extra pages like new, edit, delete pages for any framework and MVC.